gynoid lipodystrophy, known colloquially as cellulite, is the orange peel type or cottage cheese-like dimpling of the skin on the thighs and tushes of the majority of women. Since it basically results from excess fat storage, attention is turned to spermine and spermidine as potential culprits. And indeed, rubbing a spermine-trapping molecule on your thighs apparently results in a significant drop in thigh volume, circumference, and cellulite scores. This potential culprit, spermine, was first discovered in human semen back in the 1600s, but only recently quantified in food. Top sources in the American diet: ground meat and lunch meat, such as ham, turkey, bologna, salami, as well as green peas, which is also the primary source of spermidine, along with cheese, such as American and cheddar. So, would eating some cheesy-peasy meat casserole make cellulite worse? It's never been tested, but if it did, this could be one of the mechanisms. The reason this study was funded by the National Cancer Institute is not because of cellulite, but because of the concern that this whole class of compounds may increase cancer risk. For example, intake of polyamines like spermine was recently associated with increased risk of colorectal polyps. The other cellulite theory has to do with the hormone adiponectin. If you biopsy the fat in the gluteal region of women with and without cellulite, there seems to be less adiponectin expression in the cellulitic butt fat, so maybe adiponectin is protective. How do you keep adiponectin levels from dropping? Don't eat a sausage and egg breakfast, which leads to a drop in levels within hours compared to a vegetarian meal. And switching to a vegetarian diet appears to increase protective adiponectin levels 19%. They compared a meat-free, egg-free diet of vegetables, grains, beans, fruits, and nuts with animal products limited to a maximum of 1 portion of low-fat yogurt a day, compared to the conventional diabetic diet. Though they were made to eat the exact same number of calories, the veg group lost more weight, lost more waist, lost more cholesterol, more sub-Q fat, more belly fat. And subcutaneous fat is what makes up cellulite. So a plant-based diet could be expected to decrease cellulite, but we won't know for sure until it's experimentally tested directly. The use of cinnamon to help treat diabetes remains controversial. We know that cinnamon is so good at controlling one's blood sugar that you can cheat on a diabetes test by consuming 2 teaspoons of cinnamon the night before your glucose tolerance test. Basically, they make you drink some sugar water and see how well your body can keep your blood sugar levels under control. And if you eat those 2 teaspoons right when the test starts, or 12 hours before, you can significantly blunt the spike. A half teaspoon of cinnamon does not seem to be enough, but about a teaspoon a day does appear to make a significant difference. A review of the best studies done to date found that the intake of cinnamon by type 2 diabetics or prediabetics does lower their blood glucose significantly. So what's the controversy? Well, as I described before, cassia cinnamon, also known as Chinese cinnamon, or probably what you're getting at the store if it just says cinnamon, contains a compound called coumarin, which may be toxic to the liver in high enough doses. Originally, the concern was mainly for kids during Christmas time, where they might get an above-average exposure, but more recently some researchers suggested that kids just sprinkling some cassia cinnamon on their oatmeal a few times a week might exceed the recommended safety limit. The bold values here are above the recommended upper limit. For little kids, just a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon a few times a week may be too much, and if you're eating that cinnamon-sprinkled oatmeal more than every day, even adults can bump up against the limit. So a teaspoon a day of cassia cinnamon might be too much for anyone. But look, no problem. Just switch from cassia cinnamon to Ceylon cinnamon. You can get the benefits without the potential risks, right? Well, without the risks, yes, but we're not sure about the benefits. Nearly all the studies showing blood sugar benefits of cinnamon were done on cassia. We've just assumed that the same would apply for the safer cinnamon Ceylon, but only recently was it put to the test. Owing to the presence of that toxic compound, the Federal Institute for Risk Assessment in Europe has warned against consuming large amounts of the cassia cinnamon, suggesting a switch from cassia cinnamon to Ceylon cinnamon, also known as true cinnamon. But we didn't know whether or not the true cinnamon had similar benefits until now. We saw that nice blunting of blood sugar levels in response to cassia cinnamon, but in response to Ceylon cinnamon, nothing. Bummer. Right? In fact, they're thinking, maybe that potentially toxic coumarin stuff was the active ingredient in the cassia cinnamon all along. So, take out the toxin, you take out the benefit. So, they conclude, yeah, it's great that health authorities are recommending the switch. However, the positive effects seen with cassia could then be lost. So, should we give up on going out of our way to add cinnamon to our diet? No, I think it's still a good idea to shoot for about a teaspoon of cinnamon of Ceylon cinnamon a day, since there's a bunch of other benefits linked to cinnamon besides just blood sugar control, not the least of which is its potent antioxidant content. In fact, one of the cheapest food sources of antioxidants, beating out the cloves and coming in just under purple cabbage. But cinnamon can no longer be considered a safe and effective treatment for diabetes. Either you're using cassia cinnamon and it's effective but may not be safe, or using Ceylon cinnamon, which is safe but does not appear effective. But look, even the cassia cinnamon only brought down blood sugars modestly. In other words, only as good as the leading diabetes drug in the world, metformin, sold as glucophage. Yeah, it may work as good as the leading drug, but that's not saying much. The best way to treat diabetes is to attempt to cure it completely, reversing diabetes with a healthy diet. In my research on cinnamon, I ran across a peculiar paper speculating that certain natural compounds of spices, such as nutmeg, may form amphetamine-like compounds within the body, sufficient to elevate the mood and help provide some added Christmas cheer during the holiday season. This hypothetical risk was raised as far back as the 60s in the New England Journal, where it was pondered whether the age-old custom of adding nutmeg to eggnog arose from the psychopharmacological effects described in cases of nutmeg intoxication. Such cases evidently go back to the 1500s, where it was used as an abortifacient to induce a miscarriage, and in the 1960s as a psychotropic drug. The researchers conclude that while nutmeg is much cheaper for use and probably less dangerous than heroin, you don't want to take too much. The toxic dose of nutmeg is 2 to 3 teaspoons, which I assumed no one would ever come close to unintentionally, until I saw this report, in which a couple ate some pasta and collapsed, were hospitalized, a big mystery, until the husband revealed that he had accidentally added 1/3 of a jar of nutmeg to the meal whilst cooking it. That's like about 4 teaspoons. I don't know how they could have ate it. I imagine the poor wife just trying to be polite. Decades ago, a concern was raised about some of the components of the spice tarragon, so much so that the European Union's Health and Consumer Protection Scientific Committee on Food eventually concluded that one of its constituents may damage DNA, cause cancer, and so we should reduce and restrict its use. But they were talking about an isolated chemical from tarragon being used as a flavoring agent in alcoholic beverages, canned fish, and fats and oils. As recently as 2011, reviews concluded that the consumption of the tarragon leaves themselves should present little or no risk. But this was based on studies done on rats. Now, a 2012 study made me feel better, suggesting that while the isolated tarragon chemical may indeed be toxic to human liver cells, full extracts of the leaves were not, suggesting that the whole food may contain compounds that counteract the toxic effects. And so I was going to leave it at that, and not even do a video about it, since tarragon seemed to be in the clear, but a 2013 study on human white blood cells reopened the question, finding that whole leaf tarragon extracts may have DNA-damaging properties after all. Remember the Comet test? They conclude that tarragon does indeed appear to be mutagenic to at least a certain extent. However, the current data is not comprehensive enough to draw definitive conclusions regarding its potential risk to human health with sustained use, nor comprehensive enough to establish a safe dose or quantify the risk. Nevertheless, future use of tarragon in both diet or herbal medicine should be undertaken with an awareness of its potential toxicity. So what have I taken away from all this? Well, my family eats tarragon so rarely, it's not probably going to change our intake at all. But if you're a tarragon fanatic, I'd suggest moderating your intake and substituting another herb like a dash of fennel or aniseed or chervil, all of which have a similar licoricey tarragon taste. The only caveat I could find is that you should, if you pick chervil wild, I would be cautious, as it bears a resemblance to an herb known all too well to Socrates, poison hemlock. Breast pain accompanying one's period, called premenstrual mastalgia, was dismissed in the 70s as merely an expression of psychoneurosis of women. They're just frustrated and unhappy because they haven't given their husbands children yet. Now we know what women always knew. Breast pain is all too common, may be severe enough to interfere with usual daily activities, and its effect on quality of life is often underestimated. Though pain can be severe, the cause and optimal treatment remain undefined. Approximately 60 to 70% of women experience some type of breast pain at some stage of their lives, and in 10 to 20% of cases it is severe. Now, some breast tenderness during one cycle is normal, but breast pain is not. In many cases, surgery was prescribed. Thankfully, by 1999, we were evidently living in an era of evidence-based surgery, what a concept, where we have to justify the surgery we undertake, and so the profession stopped cutting off the breasts of women in pain. The hormone prolactin is considered a central factor, as women with cyclical breast pain were found to have elevated levels, and a prolactin inhibitor drug was found to be an effective treatment. The side effects, though, were so bad that some women couldn't even finish the study. There has to be a better way. Well, while up to 2/3 of Western women suffer from breast pain in their lifetimes, it apparently may affect as few as 5% in Asian cultures. Maybe it has something to do with diet. Women eating traditional plant-based diets all their lives, like rural Bantu African women, have lower prolactin levels. How do we know the difference isn't just genetic? Well, when you take those women and feed them a Western diet, meat, butter, milk, eggs, bread, and sugar for a few weeks, they experience a significant rise in prolactin. In fact, hormonal changes were comparable to those found in women with menstrual irregularities more common in the West. Right? They got just as bad as they started eating like us. What part of the Western diet was responsible, though? Maybe it was the bread and sugar? To see if it was the meat, researchers took some New Yorkers, put them on a vegetarian diet for 2 weeks, and that alone brought their prolactin levels down, suggesting that the removal of meat and meat products from the diet can reduce the release of prolactin. So let's give it a try for breast pain. The first pilot study involved 10 women with severe cyclical mastalgia, put on a low-fat diet for 3 months, either vegetarian or mostly vegetarian, and all 10 women got better. There was no control group, though, so part of their improvement may have just been the placebo effect, so a randomized controlled trial was undertaken. This Canadian research group had been carrying out a clinical trial of dietary fat reduction in patients with precancerous breast changes, and they noted that patients with cyclical breast problems frequently experience striking relief of symptoms after reduction of dietary fat. So they randomized women into 2 groups, and again, a significant improvement in symptoms was found. Since then, we learned that vegetarian women have fewer menstrual disturbances than non-vegetarian women. Only about 5% of their cycles were anovulatory, meaning they failed to release an egg, compared to 15% of non-vegetarian menstrual cycles. Those eating more plant-based low-fat diets may also experience significantly less bloating. And compared to placebo, women with painful menstrual cramps placed on a vegan diet experienced significant relief. This was a so-called crossover study, where they put meat-eating women on a plant-based diet for 2 cycles, and then switched them back to their regular diet with some placebo supplement, so you can show changes before and after, and then back to baseline. The problem is that several participants felt so much better on the plant-based diet, they refused to go back to their regular diet, thereby screwing up the study. Bottom line is that a plant-based diet may offer relief from breast pain, as well as significant reductions in menstrual pain duration, pain intensity, and duration of premenstrual symptoms related to concentration, behavioral change, and water retention. A study on the effect of flaxseed ingestion on the menstrual cycle found a tablespoon a day of ground flax seeds lengthened the luteal phase, meaning flax can delay one's next period by about a day, and resulted in fewer anovulatory cycles. These are the same kind of improvements in ovarian function seen in women eating plant-based diets: a longer luteal phase and fewer anovulatory cycles, fewer failed ovulations, an indication that vegetarian women have fewer disturbances in their cycles. In fact, those eating vegan in this study never failed to ovulate at all, similar to women eating daily flax. Since those same hormonal changes associated with eating plant-based diets seem to improve premenstrual and menstrual symptoms, such as breast pain, maybe flax seeds would help too. The effects of dietary flaxseed in women with breast pain associated with their cycles. Although hormone treatments, such as tamoxifen, may be helpful, they often cause unpleasant side effects, and there may be risks associated with long-term use of hormonal therapy. Dietary flaxseed is therefore an attractive alternative for controlling these symptoms. So, 116 young women with severe cyclical mastalgia, severe menstrual breast pain, over a pre-study period of 6 months, were randomized in a double-blind manner to either a muffin containing about 3.5 tablespoons of flaxseed or a placebo muffin, and followed for a few cycles. There was some placebo muffin effect, but there was a significantly greater reduction in reported breast pain, breast swelling, and breast lumpiness in the flaxseed group. It is concluded that flaxseed is effective in relieving symptoms of cyclical mastalgia without significant side effects, and might be considered an alternative treatment for cyclical breast pain. But if it works, and there are only good side effects, why is it an alternative treatment, and not the primary, first-line treatment? Well, the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has not issued treatment guidelines, but the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada has. They first dispel the myth that caffeine is to blame, or that vitamin E supplements are helpful. Instead, dietary flaxseed should be considered as a first-line therapy for menstrual breast pain, and only then consider drugs if flax doesn't work. Oh, and breast pain should not be treated by use of mastectomy. What is the hydration status of healthy children in the United States? Preventing cellular dehydration is integral to hormonal, immune, neurological, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, muscle, and skeletal function. So, researchers got urine samples from a group of 9 to 11-year-olds in LA and Manhattan on their way to school to see how they were doing. $50 to pee in a cup. Not bad. The study was motivated by recent studies in Israel showing children did not seem to be hydrated enough, but Israel's in a desert, so that's why they repeated the study under cooler and less arid conditions. Yet, U.S. kids did just as bad as the Israeli kids. The urine from nearly 2/3 of the kids was considered too concentrated and indicated that they were dehydrated. Why? They weren't drinking enough water. 3/4 of the kids did not drink water between when they woke up and when they went off to school. But most did eat breakfast, so they must have been drinking something. The problem is that other beverages are not as hydrating. The levels of sodium, sugars, and amino acids in milk and juice can shrink cells and trigger the release of the hormone that signals dehydration. So what, though? Right? I mean, is there any actual negative impact of mild dehydration on their ability to function at school? Historically, most of the studies on hydration and mental functioning were done on adults under extreme conditions, like having people exercise in 113-degree heat, or giving people powerful diuretics like Lasix and putting them on a treadmill. And most of the studies on hydration and cognitive performance have been performed on military personnel to evaluate soldiers' ability to function in extreme circumstances. It's easy to imagine that a soldier fighting in the desert with a heavy rucksack and a protective suit must be physically and cognitively at their best. It is, however, very difficult to translate this knowledge to normal real-life circumstances. But 3 new studies did just that. Simple study: take a group of school children, randomly allocate them to drink a cup of water or not, and then just give them all a test and see who does better, and the winner was the cup of water group. Conclusion: the results of the present study suggest that even children in a state of mild dehydration, not induced by intentional water deprivation or by heat stress or living in an extreme climate, can benefit from drinking more water and improve their cognitive performance. So, water worked for 2nd and 3rd graders. What about 1st grade? Same experimental design, but this time, instead of forcing kids in the water group to drink a cup, the water group was just given some water and told to drink as much as they wanted, and again, found significant improvement in their performance on various tasks, leading to the same conclusion. Even under circumstances of mild dehydration, children's cognitive performance can be improved by having a drink of water. And the latest study that just came out, the largest to date, which really put it all together, they too also found a remarkable proportion of children were in a state of mild voluntary dehydration at the beginning of the school day, found a significant negative correlation between dehydration and, for example, the ability to remember numbers. They offered a randomized group some water, and those kids on average felt better and performed better. Though dehydration might affect some cognitive abilities more than others, it is an adverse state that might render the school day more challenging for children. Even doctors often apparently fail to realize the connection. A recent study found that healthcare professionals under-recognize the importance of proper hydration for mental health. Who would care enough about the importance of human hydration to even do such a study? The European Hydration Institute, founded in part by the Coca-Cola Company. Significant improvement in cognitive performance, but not with Coke, and not with Ritalin or some new drug either, just plain water. Think how much drug companies could make if they could sell sugar pills, but just tell kids to take the fake pill with a glass of water. Most Americans don't even meet the watered-down federal dietary recommendations. But is it because healthy foods are more expensive? Are healthy foods really more expensive? It depends on how you measure the price. For over a century, the value of food has been measured in cost per calorie. If you were a bricklayer in Massachusetts in 1894, you may have needed more than 8,000 calories a day, so the emphasis was on cheap calories. So while beans and sugar both cost the same back then, about 5 cents a pound, sugar beat out beans for fuel value, more calories per unit cost. Of course, food offers much more than just calories, but they can be excused for their ignorance, since vitamins and minerals hadn't even been discovered yet. But even to this day, when the cost of foods are related to their nutritional value, the value they're talking about is cheap calories. And when you rank foods like that, then indeed, junk food and meat is cheaper per calorie than fruits and vegetables. But that doesn't take serving size into account. If you measure foods in cost per serving, or cost per pound, then fruits and vegetables are actually cheaper. For all metrics except the price of food calories, the USDA research found that healthy foods cost less than less healthy foods. Here's 100 calories of cheese, 100 calories of candy, 100 calories of chicken, chips, bread, oil, fruits, vegetables. Which 100 calories is going to fill you up more? Most importantly, though, which is going to have the most nutrition? Here's the average nutrient density of fruits, vegetables, refined grains, meats, milk, and empty-calorie foods. So while junk food may be 4 times cheaper than vegetables, you get 20 times less nutrition. For meat, we'd be spending 3 times more to get 16 times less. More money for less nutrition. Conclusion. Educational messages focusing on a complete diet should consider the role of food costs and provide specific recommendations for increasing nutrient-dense foods by replacing some of the meat with lower-cost, nutrient-dense foods. Beans and raw vegetables are less expensive, nutrient-dense, and maybe more satiating. So, for example, incorporating more beans, legumes, less meat may be a cost-effective way to improve diet quality, not only for low-income populations, I might add, but for everybody. Recently, the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the official World Health Organization body that decides what is and is not cancer-causing, concluded that alcoholic beverages, all alcoholic beverages, are to be considered carcinogenic to humans. Most recent research has focused on acetaldehyde, the first and most toxic alcohol metabolite, as a cancer-causing agent. Seems that bacteria in our mouths oxidize alcohol into this carcinogen called acetaldehyde, which we then swallow. There's convincing evidence that alcohol consumption increases the risk of breast cancer, but most of the data derived from studies that focused on the effect of kind of moderate or high alcohol intakes, while little was known about light alcohol drinking, like up to a drink a day. Hence this new meta-analysis of studies that compared light drinkers to non-drinkers, and found a moderate but significant association with breast cancer based on the results of more than 100 studies. They estimated that about 5,000 breast cancer deaths a year are attributable to light drinking, meaning nearly 5,000 women that died of breast cancer maybe wouldn't have if they just would have stayed away from alcohol completely, leading to an editorial in the medical journal Breast that concluded, women who consume alcohol chronically have an increased risk for breast cancer that is dose-dependent but without threshold, meaning there's apparently no level of alcohol consumption that doesn't raise breast cancer risk at least a little. So no safe threshold. Any level of alcohol consumption appears to increase the risk of developing an alcohol-related cancer. For example, the Harvard Nurses Health Study found that even consumption of less than a single drink per day may be associated with a modest increase in risk. Forget a single drink. What about a single sip? A new study found that even holding a teaspoon of hard liquor in your mouth for 5 seconds and then spitting it out results in carcinogenic concentrations of acetaldehyde produced from the alcohol in the oral cavity instantly after a small sip of a strong alcoholic beverage, and the exposure continues for about 10 minutes after spitting it out, and you didn't even drink it. Even alcohol-containing mouthwash can give you a carcinogenic spike. The researchers conclude, all in all, there's a rather low margin of safety in the use of alcohol-containing mouthwash. Typical use will reach the concentration range above which adverse effects are to be expected. Until the establishment of a more solid scientific basis for a threshold level of acetaldehyde in saliva, prudent public health policy would recommend generally refraining from using alcohol in such products. So why isn't the same recommendation made for alcoholic beverages? Well, as the Harvard paper concludes, individuals will need to weigh the risks of light to moderate alcohol use on breast cancer development against the benefits for heart disease prevention to make the best personal choice regarding alcohol consumption. They're talking about the famous J-shaped curve. While smoking is bad and more smoking is worse, and exercising is good and more exercising is better, for alcohol there appears to be this beneficial effect of small doses. A 6-pack a day increases overall mortality, but so does teetotaling. The number one killer of women isn't breast cancer, it's heart disease, and a drink a day reduces the risk of heart disease. Why just reduce the risk of heart disease, though, when you may nearly eliminate the risk of heart disease completely with a healthy diet? So a plant-based diet that excludes certain plant-based beverages may be the best for overall survival. There are many ways to compare the healthfulness of different foods. One can compare nutrient content, for example. So if you were interested in antioxidants, you might compare vitamin C levels. If you did that for our two most popular fruits, apples and bananas, based on vitamin C content, bananas would appear twice as healthy, 10 milligrams in a banana compared to only 5 milligrams in an apple. But vitamin C is just one of thousands of different phytonutrients in fruits and vegetables. Turns out the vitamin C in apples accounts for less than 1% of an apple's total antioxidant activity. Here's the total antioxidant content of a red, delicious apple. Here's how much the vitamin C in the apple contributes. You can hardly even see it. Even though there's only 5 milligrams of vitamin C in a small apple, it has the antioxidant equivalent of 1,500 milligrams of vitamin C. I've reviewed before how taking that much vitamin C straight in a supplement might actually have a pro-oxidant effect and cause DNA damage. But you can get 3 times the antioxidant power eating a single apple without the adverse effects. Of course, there's more than just vitamin C in bananas, too. In fact, I was surprised to see the study out of Harvard suggesting that not only blueberries and strawberries, but bananas were significant sources of anthocyanins, the red, blue, violet phytonutrients found in berries. Maybe I underestimated bananas. They are, after all, technically berries. Still, I'm looking at these 3 fruits and I'm thinking, I see some anthocyanins here and here, but not seeing much, red, blue, or violet here. Now, wild bananas are a different story. There's anthocyanins in blue, purple, orange-red, red-purple, and pink-purple bananas, right? But none in yellow. So the Harvard researchers were challenged on it, and they said, look, we just took values from the USDA, and it turns out USDA apparently made a mistake. No anthocyanins in bananas, and despite twice the vitamin C, bananas were beat out by apples in terms of overall antioxidant power. But that's just measuring the ability of these fruits to quench an oxidation reaction in a test tube. It'd be nice to measure actual biological activity. For example, in this apple study, they also measured the ability of apple extracts from both peeled and unpeeled apples to suppress the growth of human cancer cells growing in a petri dish, compared to control. Wouldn't it be great to be able to compare that kind of superpower between different fruits? Well, now we can. Here's a graph of cancer cell proliferation versus increasing concentrations of the 11 most common fruits eaten in the United States. They decided to use human liver cancer for this study. If you drip water on these cancer cells as a control, nothing happens, right? They start out powering away at 100% growth, and they keep powering away at 100% growth. And pineapples, pears, and oranges don't do much better. Peaches start pulling away from the pack. At high peach concentrations, cancer cell proliferation drops about 10%, but bananas and grapefruits work about 4 times better, dropping cancer growth rates by about 40%. Red grapes, strawberries, and apples do even better, cutting cancer cell growth up to half at only half the dose. But these 2 fruits are the winners, causing a dramatic drop in cancer proliferation at just tiny doses: lemons and cranberries. So if you look at the effective dose required to suppress liver cancer cell proliferation, apples are more powerful than bananas, but cranberries win the day. And there was no effective dose listed for orange, pear, or pineapple, since they didn't appear to affect this cancer cell growth at all. In addition to suppressing liver cancer growth in vitro, cranberries have often been found to have similar effects against human breast, colon, brain tumor, oral, and ovarian cancer cells. Here's the latest looking at prostate cancer cell growth. The United States has the highest rate of prostate cancer in the world, so let's try a Native American fruit. Researchers started out with about 50,000 human prostate cancer cells in a petri dish, and if you do nothing, Within a day, you're closer to 100,000, then 200,000, then nearly 400,000 within 72 hours. But by adding just a smidgen of cranberries, or 2 smidgens, you can see they block that exponential cancer growth. The reason they tested such tiny concentrations is that we only absorb a small fraction of the cranberry phytonutrients we eat into our bloodstream. Still, cranberries are cheap. If drug companies and supplement manufacturers are going to capitalize on this, they need to define cranberries' active ingredient. Here's some of the various phytonutrients in cranberries, so different fractions were tested against various types of cancer to find the magic bullet. Yes, the anthocyanin phytonutrients inhibit colon cancer cell proliferation, about 15%, for example, about the same with the proanthocyanidin fraction, but nothing compared to the total cranberry extract of the whole fruit. There seemed to be an additive or synergistic anti-proliferative effects resulting from a combination of the various components compared to individual purified phytochemicals. So it's always better to eat the whole fruit. How do you do that with cranberries, though? Although 5% of cranberries are sold fresh, the vast majority are consumed as processed products. To get the same amount of anthocyanin phytonutrients in a cup of fresh or frozen cranberries, you'd have to drink 16 cups of cranberry juice cocktail, eat 7 cups of dried cranberries, or 26 cans of cranberry sauce. The problem is that raw cranberries are so tart that folks may opt for the dried. In a taste test survey, consumers said they wouldn't mind eating sweetened cranberries every day, whereas raw cranberries slope down towards maybe once a year. The problem is dried cranberries tend to come sweetened. Raw cranberries don't affect your blood sugar, but sweetened dried cranberries do, even the low-sugar varieties. What about cranberry juice, or shall I say, quote-unquote juice? Cranberry cocktail is only about a quarter cranberry juice. The ruby red phytonutrients in cranberries and pure cranberry juice are powerful antioxidants, increasing the antioxidant capacity of our bloodstream within hours of consumption. But the high fructose corn syrup acts as a pro-oxidant, even if you add vitamin C to it, as they did here, canceling out some of the cranberry benefit. So how do you get the upsides without the down? Check out my pink juice video, where I offer a recipe for making no-sugar-added whole fruit cranberry cocktail. Studies like these showing that fruits can suppress the growth of cancer in a petri dish are all well and good, but we need to know if they can do the same thing within the human body. But it's considered unethical to withhold conventional cancer therapies like surgery, chemoradiation to test out some fruit or vegetable. So what do? Well, one direction researchers have taken is to use combinatorial strategies. For example, adding phytonutrients from the spice turmeric or green tea along with chemotherapy to see if that works better than chemo alone. Well, this gets complicated because chemo and radiation often work by killing cancer cells with free radicals. And so antioxidants, though they may certainly reduce the toxicity of the treatment, there's a theoretical concern, at least, that it could reduce the efficacy of the treatment as well. Another way you can study the effects of plants on cancer is by testing dietary interventions on slow-growing cancers like prostate cancer, which is how Ornish and colleagues were able to show their apparent reversal in cancer growth with a plant-based diet. He could only get away with that because these patients were in an early watch-and-wait stage of cancer. Are there any other cancers like that? Esophageal cancer is not the cancer to get. 5-year survival is only about 13%, with most people dying within the first year of diagnosis. But the development of esophageal cancer is a multi-stage process, though. You start out with a normal esophagus, the tube that connects your mouth to your stomach. It starts out fine. Then precancerous changes take place, and then localized cancer starts to grow, and then eventually it spreads, and then you die. But because of this well-defined stepwise progression of esophageal cancer, researchers jumped on it as a way to test the ability of berries, the healthiest fruits, to reverse the progression of cancer. A randomized phase 2 clinical trial of powdered strawberries in patients with precancerous lesions of the esophagus. 6 months of eating 1 or 2 ounces of freeze-dried strawberries. That's like over a pound of fresh strawberries a day, and the progression of disease was reversed in 80% of those in the high-dose strawberry treatment. At the beginning of the study, none had a normal esophagus. They either had mild or moderate precancerous disease, but by the end of the study, after all those strawberries, most lesions either regressed from moderate to mild or disappeared completely. Here's some representative before and after pictures. Give some strawberries, and many went from moderate disease to mild, or from mild to gone. By the end of the study, half of those in the high dose of strawberries walked away disease-free. A drop of tumor markers, before and after. Some new chemo drug? No, all because of just strawberries, showing for the first time that dietary strawberries could significantly decrease the grade of patients' precancerous esophageal lesions. Cellular proliferation before and after treatment with strawberries. Look at that, right? And what's the side effect? Like get a little strawberry seed stuck in your teeth or something? Recent population studies also suggest that plant foods are protective against esophageal cancer, whereas diets with lots of meat and fat appear to double the odds of cancer, and lots of fruits and vegetables may cut one's odds of esophageal cancer in half. A diet rich in foods of animal origin, poor in foods containing vitamins and fiber, in other words, plant foods, may increase esophageal cancer risk. And now we know at least one plant that may even reverse the course of disease if caught early enough. The findings were heralded as groundbreaking in an editorial in the Journal of the American Association for Cancer Research. Given that the editorial was written by a pair of pharmacy professors, though, they of course concluded that the active components and molecular targets responsible for the efficacy of strawberries must be identified, posing the question, is the best approach to just eat strawberries, or can they make a strawberry-derived drug that works even better? More buried treasure. A story similar to the strawberries and esophageal cancer revelation has emerged with black raspberries and oral cancer. Again, it started with in vitro studies. Oral cancer, one of the 10 most common cancers in the U.S., with a flip-of-the-coin death rate. We can reduce our risk of oral cancer by avoiding all forms of tobacco, restricting alcohol consumption, avoiding obesity, and eating at least 5 servings of vegetables and fruits a day, as well as shooting for fewer than 6 lifetime oral sex partners, and avoiding prolonged marijuana use, meaning more than about 20 years. But what if you already have precancerous changes in your mouth? Well, black raspberries appear to selectively inhibit the growth of both malignant and pre-malignant cells, but not normal cells. Just what we want, but this was in a petri dish. So they took some folks with precancerous growth in their mouths, so-called oral intraepithelial neoplasia, and had them rub a black raspberry gel on it for 6 weeks. Like the esophageal study with strawberries, most of the patient's lesions improved, including cases of complete clinical regression. Now you see it, now you don't, thanks to just berries. They were able to follow a reversal of genetic changes that led to the silencing of tumor suppressor genes. They used a gel just to get the berries to stick to the lesion, so they didn't have to have people eat berries all day. Now they're getting even more high-tech, developing injectable millicylindrical berry implants. Unlike standard local delivery formulations, which require multiple repeated dosing throughout the day, implantable vehicles alleviate concerns with multiple dosing schedules and poor patient compliance. They fill up these little microscopic barrels with black raspberry powder, inject them into the lesion, and then they slowly kind of dissolve, releasing their phytonutrients over a whole month. Now, for those who'd rather eat their berries the old-fashioned way, unfortunately, you pretty much have to be in Oregon the 3 weeks in July when these particular berries are harvested to get your hands on them. I've never seen them frozen in stores. You can order them online frozen. It's like $20 a pound with shipping. The freeze-dried powder is comparatively cheaper. But I'd always wondered about how much nutrition may be lost. Well, there's finally been a study. The antioxidant concentration was measured in fresh, frozen, and freeze-dried strawberries and strawberry jam, with the intent of measuring antioxidant content of foods typically available to consumers in grocery stores. On a gram-for-gram dry weight basis, the freeze-drying holds up remarkably well, even better than freezing. Jam, though, presumably because the heat processing really does take a hit. On a consumed weight basis, though, the freeze-dried do shine, but just because an ounce of dried is equivalent to about a cup and a half of fresh berries. There's lots of products that promise to boost our immune system, and who wouldn't want that? Well, there's millions of people with autoimmune diseases, inflammatory diseases, and allergies, right? Millions of people whose immune systems may already be a bit too active. I try to make sufferers of seasonal allergies feel better by explaining that having an overactive immune system is not all bad. Individuals with allergies have a decreased risk for cancer compared with the general population. Yes, your immune system may be in such overdrive it's attacking things left and right like tree pollen, but that heightened state of alert might also help bring down some budding tumors in the body. So it's tricky. We want to boost the part of the immune system that fights infection, while downregulating the part that results in chronic inflammation, and mushrooms may fit the bill. There are thousands of edible mushrooms, though only about 100 are cultivated commercially. Only 10 of those really on an industrial scale, and I do mean industrial, rising to over 20 million tons, and for good reason. They accelerate immunoglobulin A secretion. Let me explain. Though skin is considered our largest organ, we actually interface with the outside world more through our mucous membranes that line our mouth, our entire digestive tract, our reproductive and urinary systems, inside the breast glands, on our eyeballs, occupying our largest body surface area. Our gut alone covers more area than a tennis court, and much of it is only one cell thick. One microscopic layer is all that separates us from all the toxins, viruses, and bacteria out there, and so we need one heck of a first-line defense. And that defense is called IgA, immunoglobulin A. Immunoglobulin means antibody. These are our type A antibodies. Dietary intake may improve mucosal immunity by accelerating IgA secretion, but no studies have ever been conducted on mushrooms until now. So they had half people eat their normal diet, half eat their normal diet, plus cooked white button mushrooms every day for a week. Then, using the passive dribble method for collecting saliva, they just measured the amount of IgA they were pumping out. No change in the control group, but after a week of mushrooms, IgA secretion jumped 50%, and even stayed up there for a week after they stopped eating the mushrooms. This study has shown, for the first time, that dietary intake of white button mushrooms, just regular white mushrooms, about a cup a day, resulted in higher IgA secretion, and the elevated secretion remained stable into week 2, but then fell back to baseline. So this suggests that in arresting or slowing the decrease in IgA in individuals such as the elderly or those with immune compromise, a continuous daily intake of mushrooms may be necessary to maintain an increased IgA secretion, meaning you can't just eat mushrooms once and expect to be protected forever. You have to make them part of your regular diet. But if you continue to churn out 50% more antibodies, might that contribute to chronic inflammation, which is implicated in the development of a variety of diseases? No, in fact, mushrooms appear to have an anti-inflammatory capacity in vitro, suggesting that they could be regarded as a potential source of natural anti-inflammatory agents. For example, here's an inflammatory response without mushrooms and with mushrooms, right? Both white and a few other varieties. They think it might be the phytonutrient pyrogallol, found in a variety of mushrooms, as well as in our old friend amla, Indian gooseberries, that similarly appear to reduce inflammation while at the same time boosting immune and anti-cancer function. Probiotics have moved from the field of alternative medicine into the mainstream slowly but surely over the past decade. The best evidence we have is for the prevention of antibiotic-associated diarrhea and the treatment of gastroenteritis. Antibiotics administration is followed in up to 40% of cases by the appearance of diarrhea. But, for example, you may be able to cut the risk in kids in half by administering probiotics along with the antibiotics. Which kinds and how much? Lactobacillus rhamnosus and Saccharomyces boulardii appear to be the most effective strains, and studies using more than 5 billion live organisms appear to achieve better results than those using smaller doses. The importance of correct dosing cannot evidently be overemphasized. For example, in adults, going with 100 billion organisms seem to work nearly twice as well as 50 billion in preventing antibiotic-associated diarrhea. The second well-established usage of probiotics is in the treatment of acute infectious diarrhea, shortening the duration of symptoms by about a day. But we still don't know what the best probiotic doses and strains are. Studies have used between 20 million organisms a day to 3 trillion, and there are thousands of different strains to choose from. And even if you wanted a particular strain, odds are the label is lying to you anyway. Less than a third of commercial probiotic products tested actually contained what the label claimed. About half had fewer viable organisms than stated, and half contained contaminant organisms, including potentially pathogenic ones, as well as mold. Now, ideally, we'd repopulate our gut with the whole range of natural gut flora, not just one or two hand-picked strains, and for serious infections, this has been attempted starting back in 1958. Why not give people a fecal enema? Take the full complement of gut bacteria from a healthy colon, stuff it into an unhealthy colon. Or you can go the other route and administer the donor stool through the nose. Evidently, this route of administration saves time, is cheaper, less inconvenient for the patient. Preferred stool donors, in order of preference, were spouses or significant others, family members, and then anyone else they could find, such as a medical staff member. What you do is first pick a nice, soft specimen, whip it up in a household blender until smooth, a little Vitamix action, put it through a coffee filter, and then just squirt the stool up their nose through a tube and into their stomach. Don't try this at home. How receptive were the patients to this rather unusual smoothie recipe? None of the patients in this series raised objections to the proposed stool transplantation procedure on the basis that it lacked aesthetic appeal. However, since production of fresh material on demand, not always practical, researchers up in Minnesota recently introduced frozen donor material as another treatment option, all described in great detail in the latest review on the subject out of Yale, entitled The Power of Poop. Though foods may be better carriers for probiotics than supplements, if one does choose to go with supplements, they be taken before, during, or after meals. When it comes to probiotic supplements sold in capsules, the commercial literature is often confusing, in that sometimes the consumer is instructed to take the probiotics with meals, sometimes before or after meals, and occasionally on an empty stomach. This has led to serious confusion for the industry and the consumer. Surprisingly, it doesn't appear as if any studies had ever examined this question until now. To be able to measure probiotic concentrations minute by minute throughout the entire process, they had to build a fake digestive tract, fake stomach, fake intestines, but complete with real saliva and digestive enzymes, acid, bile, etc. What did they find? Here's the survival of 3 different types of probiotics before, during, and after meals, and separately in oatmeal and milk, milk alone, apple juice, or water. Conclusion: probiotic bacteria survival was best when provided within 30 minutes before or simultaneously with a meal or beverage that contained some fat content. Before Thorazine was invented in 1950, mental illness was often treated surgically. In fact, in 1949, the inventor of the lobotomy was awarded the Nobel Prize. But before tens of thousands were lobotomized, colectomy was all the rage. There was this theory that bad bacteria in the gut, intestinal putrefaction, was the cause of mental illness, so the cure was to just surgically remove the colon. Yes, the surgery killed about 1 in 3, but when they didn't die, surgeons bragged that, for example, when he resected the colons of schoolchildren as a preventative measure, there was a cessation of abnormal sex practices, such as masturbation, which was viewed at the time as a precursor for mental illness later in life. There were others, though, that took less drastic approaches, suggesting one could instead treat this intestinal putrefaction by changing the intestinal flora. So over a century ago, there were reports of successfully treating psychiatric illnesses like depression with a dietary regimen that included probiotics. Doctors perceived a connection between depression and feces deficient in quantity and moisture, and very offensive in odor. So they gave people probiotics, and not only did people feel better psychologically, but their feces increased in quantity, became softer, more regular consistency, and the offensive smell diminishes. Concurrent with the probiotics, however, all patients were started on a vegetarian diet, so it may not have been the probiotics at all. This field of inquiry remained dormant for about 100 years, but a new discipline has recently emerged known as enteric, meaning intestinal neuroscience. Our enteric nervous system, the collection of nerves in our gut, has been referred to as our second brain, given its size, complexity, and similarity. We've got so many nerves in our gut that as many as in our spinal cord. And it kind of makes sense. Right? The size and complexity of our gut brain is not surprising when considering the challenges posed by the interface with our largest body surface. We have 100 times more contact with the outside world through our gut than through our skin. And we also have to deal with our 100 trillion little friends down there. It takes a lot of processing power. Now, anyone who's gotten butterflies in their stomach knows that our mental state can affect our gut. In fact, everyday stressors can affect the integrity of our gut flora. This innovative study looked at feces scraped from used toilet paper in undergrads during exam week. This is how many bacteria they had in their feces before the exam. But look what happens on exam day, and in fact lasted through the whole week. So our mental state can affect our gut, but can our gut affect our mental state? We didn't know until recently. For example, many suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome complain of gut dysfunction, so researchers tried giving people probiotics to see if their mental and emotional state could be improved, and indeed, it appeared to help. What about healthy people, though? This is the study that really rocked the scientific establishment. An assessment of the psychotropic properties of probiotics. 1 month of probiotics was found to significantly decrease symptoms of anxiety, depression, anger, and hostility. How is that possible? Well, a variety of mechanisms has been proposed for how intestinal bacteria may be communicating with our brain. Until that study was published, though, the idea that probiotic bacteria administered to the intestine could influence our brain seemed almost surreal, like science fiction. Well, science, yes, but fiction, no. Likely, organisms already inside us carry out some degree of influence on our mental well-being. So might people suffering from certain forms of mental health problems benefit from a fecal transplant from someone with a more kind of happy-go-lucky bacteria? We don't know, but this ability of probiotics to affect brain processes is perhaps one of the most exciting recent developments in probiotic research. Lavender oil, distilled from lavender flowers, is most often used in aromatherapy and massage. Despite its popularity, only recently has scientifically based investigations been undertaken into its biological activity, however. There have been small-scale studies suggesting benefit from lavender massage, but maybe it's the massage, not the lavender. There was a study on patients in intensive care comparing massage with odorless oil to massage with lavender oil, and though patients massaged with lavender oil did say they felt less anxious and more positive, there were no objective differences found in terms of blood pressure, breathing, or heart rate. Frankly, maybe the lavender was just covering up the nasty hospital smells. Subsequent studies using more sensitive tests did find physiological changes, though. We know, for example, the smell of lavender changes brainwave patterns, but what effect does this have? Well, it evidently makes people feel better, perform math better, faster, more accurately, whereas the smell of rosemary, for example, seemed to enable folks only to do math faster, not necessarily with greater accuracy. What if you actually eat lavender flowers, or in this case, take capsules of lavender-infused oil, so you could double-blind the study to compare lavender head-to-head to a drug like Valium, lorazepam, known as Ativan, for generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized and persistent anxiety is a frequent problem, and is treated with benzodiazepines, benzos or downers like Valium. Unfortunately, these substances not only make you feel like you have a hangover, but have a high potential for drug abuse and addiction, so they decided to give lavender a try. The drug Ativan certainly reduces anxiety, but so does lavender. By the end, you couldn't tell which was which. In fact, among those that responded to either, the lavender actually seemed to work better. Since lavender oil has no potential for drug abuse and causes no hangover effects, it appears to be an effective and well-tolerated alternative to benzodiazepine drugs for the amelioration of generalized anxiety. One cautionary note, however: there was a case series published in the New England Journal of Medicine, Pre-puberty gynecomastia linked to lavender. Reports of young boys exposed to lavender containing lotions, soaps, hair gel, shampoo, starting to develop breasts, which disappeared after these products were discontinued, suggesting that lavender oil may possess hormone-disrupting activity. And indeed, when dripped on estrogen receptor-positive human breast cancer cells, lavender does show estrogenic effects, and a decline in male hormone activity, though it's unknown if similar reactions occur inside the body when lavender flowers or lavender oil is ingested. Lavender has been studied recently for several purposes, including treatment of mood and anxiety disorders, as well as a number of other things. Its analgesic effect, however, its painkiller effect, is one of its most widely studied properties. Surprising, then, that there hasn't been a single documented clinical trial to study lavender for the treatment of migraine headaches that affect tens of thousands of Americans every year, until now. Lavender essential oil in the treatment of migraine headache, a placebo-controlled clinical trial. Migraine sufferers were asked to, at the early signs of a headache, rub 2 to 3 drops of the lavender essential oil onto their upper lip and inhale its vapor for a 15-minute period, and then score the severity of their headaches for the next 2 hours. In the control group, they did the same thing, except they used drops of basically unscented liquid wax. And neither group was allowed to use any painkillers. In the lavender group, 74% of patients had an improvement in their symptoms, significantly better than placebo. Though in the study lavender wasn't directly compared to more conventional treatments, lavender appears to stack up pretty well compared to typical drugs. So lavender helped about 3/4 of the time. High-dose Tylenol only works about half the time. Ibuprofen, 57% of the time. The #1 prescribed drug, generic Imitrex, effective 59% of the time. And then the hardcore treatment they use in emergency rooms where they inject you under the skin, 70%. And all these work better than the original migraine therapy known as trepanning, where doctors drill a hole in your head to let the evil spirits escape. Conclusion. The present study suggests that inhalation of lavender essential oil may be an effective and safe treatment modality in acute management of migraine headaches. In the same way fermented pickles, kimchi, and sauerkraut foster the growth of good bacteria like lactobacillus by maintaining an acidic environment, so does the human vagina. The normal pH of one's vagina is that of tomato juice. Once it starts creeping up to that of coffee, though, an overgrowth of bad bacteria can take hold and cause bacterial vaginosis, which affects an astounding 29% of American women. That's nearly 1 in 3 women in the United States. That makes it the most frequent cause of vaginal complaints among younger women, affecting tens of millions. It's commonly diagnosed with the so-called whiff test, where the doctor takes a whiff of the vaginal discharge, sniffing for the characteristic fishy odor. Traditional risk factors for bacterial vaginosis include douching, which has been associated with a wide range of problems, so with no demonstrable benefits and considerable evidence of harm, women should be encouraged to not douche. Medical professionals need to clearly explain that the vagina is naturally self-cleaning. Recently, poor nutrition has been added to the list of risk factors. You appear more likely to get bacterial vaginosis if you have lower levels circulating in your bloodstream of phytonutrients like vitamin C and beta-carotene, indicating a lower intake of fruits and vegetables. In recent years, though, the field of nutrition has shifted towards examining overall dietary scores as opposed to single nutrients, because it's become recognized that nutrients are not consumed in isolation, that individuals consuming one health-promoting nutrient also tend to consume many others, and that the specific source of nutrients may be of importance. What a concept! So nutrient-rich food indexes have been devised to enable folks to get the most nutrients out of their calories. And the more nutrient-rich one's diet, the lower one's apparent risk for bacterial vaginosis. Why, though? Well, it's thought that high fat intake, particularly saturated fat, which comes mostly from like dairy, donuts, chicken in this country, may increase vaginal pH, thereby increasing the risk of bacterial vaginosis. So now that we know, the next steps ahead include sharing these findings with gynecologists, obstetricians, general practitioners, as well as increasing the awareness of the general community to the importance of optimal nutrition to prevent infections of the genital tract, reduce associated disease, and maintain reproductive health. Where do bladder infections come from? Back in the 70s, longitudinal studies of women over time showed that the movement of rectal bacteria up into the vaginal area preceded the appearance of those same types of bacteria in their urethra before they infected the bladder. But it would be another 25 years before genetic fingerprinting techniques were able to confirm this so-called fecal perineal urethral theory, indicating that indeed it's the E. coli strains residing in the rectal flora that serve as a reservoir for urinary tract infections. Yet it would be another 15 years still before we tracked it back another step and figured out where that rectal reservoir of bladder-infecting E. coli was coming from. Chicken. Researchers were able to capture these extra-intestinal, meaning outside of the gut, pathogenic, disease-causing E. coli straight from the slaughterhouse to the meat, to the urine specimens obtained from infected women. We now have proof of a direct link between farm animals, meat, and bladder infections, solid evidence that urinary tract infections can be a zoonosis, urinary tract infections as an animal-to-human disease. And UTIs, we're talking millions of women infected a year, costing over $1 billion. Even worse, the detection of multi-drug-resistant strains of E. coli in chicken meat resistant to some of our most powerful antibiotics. The best way to prevent bladder infections is the same way you best prevent all types of infections, by not getting infected in the first place. It's not in all meat equally. Beef and pork appear significantly less likely to harbor bladder-infecting strains than chicken. Can't you just use a meat thermometer and cook chicken thoroughly? Oh, we've known for 36 years it's not always the meat, but the cross-contamination. If you give people frozen chickens, naturally contaminated with antibiotic-resistant E. coli, let people prepare and cook it in their own kitchen as they normally would, and poof, the bacteria ends up in their rectum, ready to cause trouble. In fact, 5 different strains of antibiotic-resistant E. coli jumped from the chicken to the volunteer. And they know it was cross-contamination because the jump happened after the animal was prepared, but before it was eaten. Right? Not only did it not matter how well the chicken was cooked, it didn't even matter if you eat any. It's the bringing of the contaminated carcass into the home and handling it. Within days, the drug-resistant chicken bacteria had multiplied to the point of becoming a major part of the person's fecal flora in their gut. Here's all this drug-resistant bacteria colonizing this person's colon, yet the person hadn't taken any antibiotics. It's the chickens who were given the drugs. That's why the industry shouldn't be routinely feeding chickens antibiotics by the millions of pounds a year, because it can end up selecting for and amplifying superbugs that may end up in our body. What if you're really careful in the kitchen? The effectiveness of hygiene procedures for prevention of cross-contamination from chicken carcasses in the domestic kitchen. They went into 6 homes, gave them each a chicken, and asked them to cook it. Now, I expected to read that they inoculated the carcass with a specific number of bacteria to ensure everyone got a contaminated bird, but no, they realized that fecal contamination of chicken carcasses was so common that they just went to the store and bought any random chicken for people. Now, after they were done cooking it, there was bacteria from chicken feces, Salmonella, Campylobacter, both serious human pathogens, everywhere, on the cutting board, utensils, on their hands, on the fridge handle, cupboard, oven handle, doorknob. Right? But this was before they cleaned up. What about after cleaning? Still, pathogenic fecal bacteria everywhere. OK, fine. Obviously, people don't know what they're doing in the kitchen, so they took another group of people and gave them specific instructions. After you cook the chicken, you have to wash everything with hot water and detergent. They were told specifically, wash the cutting board, knobs on the sink, the faucet, the fridge, the doorknobs, everything. OK. And the researchers still found pathogenic fecal bacteria everywhere. Fine. OK. Last group. This time, they were going to insist that people bleach everything. The dishcloth immersed in bleach disinfectant, and then they spray the bleach on all those surfaces. Let the bleach disinfectant sit there for 5 minutes, and they still found Campylobacter and Salmonella on some utensils, a dishcloth, the counter around the sink, and the cupboard. Definitely better, but still, unless our kitchen is like some biohazard lab, the only way to guarantee we're not going to leave infection around the kitchen is to not bring it into the house in the first place. The good news is that it's not like you eat chicken once and you're colonized for life. In this study, the chicken bacteria only seemed to last about 10 days. The problem is that people tend to eat chicken more than once every 10 days, so they may be constantly reintroducing these chicken pathogens into their colon. For example, if you start feeding people only sterilized meat that's been boiled for an hour, within 3 weeks there's a 500-fold drop in the number of antibiotic-resistant bacteria passing through their bodies. How could any bacteria cause a bladder infection without just getting flushed away? Literally. Certainly if you're not drinking enough, or men who have prostate enlargement can't empty completely, leaving behind a stagnant pool. But in most people, there should be a constant flow of water through there. Well, bladder infection-causing E. coli evolved these finger-like projections that they use to stick to the walls of the bladder so they don't get washed away. Almost 30 years ago now, it was demonstrated that if you drip cranberry juice on E. coli, they don't stick as well. Grape juice doesn't work, nor does orange or apple juice, or even white cranberry juice made from unripened berries, so maybe it's one of the red phytonutrients that's doing it. Even if it works in a petri dish, though, we don't pee cranberry juice. How do we know that the anti-adherence phytonutrients in cranberries are even absorbed through the gut so they make it into the bladder? Well, subsequent studies showed that if you drip urine of someone who drank cranberry juice onto E. coli, you get the same anti-stick effect. Well, now we're getting somewhere. Here's the stickiness of strains of E. coli waiting in urine from someone drinking water, and here's their stickiness in the urine of someone drinking cranberry juice. Within hours of consumption, there's a drop in E. coli stickiness that appears to last throughout much of the day. So, might cranberries really help prevent bladder infections? Well, the best way to prevent infections is to not get infected in the first place, which may involve the avoidance of chicken, as I've already discussed, so you're not constantly reinfecting yourself. But if that doesn't work, if your gut remains stubbornly colonized with these bad bladder bugs, various tested cranberry products appear to reduce the recurrence of bladder infections by about 35%. Not as effective as antibiotics, but cranberries don't foster antibiotic resistance and have fewer side effects. There's good evidence to suggest that cranberries are effective for prevention, but not as an effective treatment. Right? But that makes sense, right? Cranberries prevent the initial adherence, but that occurs at the start of the infection. When the infection is present, it's already stuck there, then there's no clinical data to suggest that cranberries aren't effective in the treatment of urinary tract infections, meaning cranberries don't work better than placebo. But placebos work. For example, ibuprofen seems to work just as good as antibiotics for the treatment of uncomplicated urinary tract infections. Now, some people you really do need to treat with antibiotics: pregnant women, children, men, those with kidney infections, systemic symptoms like nausea and vomiting. But for most healthy women, bladder infections just go away on their own without antibiotics. So all the women who drink cranberry juice and have their symptoms disappear may falsely attribute their recovery to the juice, but when it comes to most UTIs, nothing works. Nothing, in fact, actually works, leading doctors to try to figure out how they can harness the placebo effect for themselves. If cranberries are so good at keeping bacteria from sticking to the wall of the bladder, what about keeping bacteria from sticking to other places? Well, there's in vitro research suggesting cranberry phytonutrients may reduce adhesion of H. pylori bacteria to the wall of the stomach, and so maybe should be given along with antibiotics to help eradicate this ulcer-causing bacteria. And hey, what about our teeth? Dental plaque is bacteria sticking to our teeth, particularly Streptococcus mutans. We've known that those with different drinking habits, be they coffee, tea, barley, coffee, or wine, have about 10 times less of this plaque bacteria. Since those are all beverages from plants, maybe phytonutrients are fighting back at plaque. If bacteria cause plaque in cavities, why not just swish with some antibiotic solution, either synthetic or natural? Well, there are downsides to just indiscriminately wiping out bacteria, both good and bad, as I detailed in my antiseptic mouthwash video. So maybe if we just stop the bad bugs from sticking to our teeth? Well, there is some evidence that cranberries may affect the adhesion of bacteria to fake teeth in a petri dish, but nothing yet definitive. Green tea also appears to help prevent cavities, which may be because of its natural fluoride content from the tea plant. I have a video about a woman who developed fluoride toxicity drinking up to like 6 cups a day, but what about just regular consumption? Well, during the tooth development years, up to about age 9, children exposed to too much fluoride can develop dental fluorosis, a mottled discoloration of the teeth. It's just a cosmetic issue and usually just kind of faint white spots, but is the main reason the EPA is reconsidering current tap water fluoridation levels. Currently, the suggested upper limit in water is 2 parts per million fluoride, and the mandatory upper limit is 4. Herbal teas were fine, about 100-fold under this limit. But caffeinated teas exceeded this suggested limit, and decaf teas exceeded the mandatory limit. Remember, though, that's the limit for tap water, so tea drinking would only pose much of a risk if kids drank it all day long as their primary beverage. So in terms of the dental ramifications, kids who primarily drank non-herbal tea as a source of hydration may be at risk for dental fluorosis. With prevailing westerly winds over Japan, nuclear fallout from the Fukushima nuclear power plant tragedy was detected throughout North America at levels comparable to those seen 25 years earlier from Chernobyl, the only other Category 7 nuclear event in history. The highest levels of radioactive iodine in rainwater was found in Boise, Idaho, and the highest levels in milk were found in San Francisco, at levels 10 times higher than the federal maximum allowed in drinking water, but below that which would be expected to pose a direct threat to U.S. public health. A controversial paper, however, in the International Journal of Health Sciences suggested the radioactive plume from the nuclear meltdowns in Fukushima may be responsible for a subsequent bump in U.S. mortality, similar to what we saw after Chernobyl, though the authors themselves underscore the research shows merely a correlation and potential evidence of a causal link, and that more research is necessary. Of all the radiation released, only a tiny fraction of the fallout reached U.S. shores. Most was absorbed by the Pacific Ocean. What does that mean for seafood safety? Researchers report unequivocal evidence that Pacific bluefin tuna have transported Fukushima-derived radioactive fallout across the entire North Pacific Ocean. Tuna actually migrate from Japan to California and appear to have taken some radioactivity with them. Even though there was a tenfold spike in radioactive cesium levels in tuna, they put it in context by knowing the baseline levels of radioactivity in fish, even before Fukushima, due to everything from thermonuclear weapons tests and sunken nuclear submarines, to just radioactive elements found naturally in the Earth's crust. The levels in seawater of radioactive polonium, for example, are minuscule, but it appears to strongly bioaccumulate up the food chain into fish. This is the same polonium used in the horrific assassination of Russian dissident Litvinenko. That's the same polonium found in fish. It's a byproduct of uranium decay, and frequently cited as one of the reasons tobacco is so carcinogenic, something the tobacco industry was well aware of and could have easily removed, but the process that could have removed the polonium affected the absorbability of nicotine, and the loss of the nicotine kick sensation was found unacceptable by industry executives, so they kept the polonium in. The radioactive polonium in cigarettes has been speculatively blamed for the link between smoking and male infertility, but most of human exposure to polonium comes from diet, mostly from fish and shellfish. And this was before Fukushima. So what then happens if you eat seafood? Researchers measured the increase in radioactive polonium levels in semen after a single seafood meal, caused a 300% spike in levels. Probably not enough to cause infertility, but that was just one meal. Whether the kind of dose you can get from eating seafood would be enough to damage sperm enough still needs to be established. You may have to eat as much as a pound of seafood a month before one might realize the harmful effects of the radiation. Interestingly, there's 8 times more polonium in cooked shrimp than in raw shrimp. Isn't that fascinating? They think it's because most of the polonium is in the shrimp's internal organs, which is released into the boiling water and contaminates the muscle, so gutting crustaceans before cooking may decrease radiation exposure. The greatest radiation exposure risk comes not from Fukushima fallout or the polonium naturally found in seafood, but from doctors. This was the study that really shook things up. Estimated risks of radiation-induced fatal cancer from pediatric CAT scans, which concluded that the best available risk estimates suggest that pediatric CT scans will result in significantly increased lifetime cancer risk. How increased? Well, in the United States, of the approximately 600,000 abdominal and head CT scans annually performed in children under the age 15, 500 of these individuals might ultimately not just get cancer, but die from cancer attributable to that CAT scan radiation. In response to this revelation, the editor-in-chief of the leading radiology journal admitted that radiologists may have not been watching out for children. These estimates were based on data from Japanese atomic bomb survivors, in terms of how many cancer deaths one can expect from what kind of radiation dose. But there's never been a study actually documenting the excess cancers until now. Turns out the X-rays released by CAT scanners might be twice as carcinogenic as the high-energy gamma rays released from the atomic bombs. A few CT scans may nearly triple the risk of brain tumors and leukemia in children. Other studies are being performed around the world to quantify the risk and should be out in the next few years. Until then, what can we do? Well, first of all, we should only get X-rays when absolutely necessary. Good evidence suggests that between a fifth and a half of CAT scans aren't necessary at all. They could be replaced with another type of imaging, or just not done, period. That's a lot of added cancer risk for no added benefit. Now, this kind of CAT scan, okay, but this kind carries risk, the risk of developing cancer. After a single CT scan may be as high as 1 in 100 for a baby girl. It can take years for cancer to develop, so that's why the risk is lower in the elderly, since they have fewer years to live. The diagnostic medical radiation dealt out in 1 year is estimated to cause 2,800 breast cancers among women in the United States, and 25,000 or so other cancers. That's doctors causing cancer. One chest CT scan is like getting 400 chest X-rays, and a stress test heart scan can be like getting over 1,000 X-rays. Doctors need to communicate the risks of these procedures. For example, the risk of a chest CT is like the risk of having a car crash during 2,500 miles of highway driving, or of smoking 700 cigarettes. You pick up a pack of cigarettes and there's a warning label, right? But then you go in for a thallium heart scan, and no one minds telling you that the risk corresponds to smoking 1,400 cigarettes. 1 in every 270 middle-aged women that get an angiogram may get cancer because of that one test. The best way to avoid the risks of radiation scans is the same way to best avoid the risks of medication: living and eating healthy enough to help avoid the need for them in the first place. Every year, doctors cause an estimated 29,000 cancers dosing patients with X-rays during CAT scans. What about dentists? 100 million Americans are exposed to dental X-rays every year. But what about the lead apron and thyroid shield? Doesn't that cover up all your vital organs? All your vital organs except one, called the brain. Dental X-rays and risk of meningioma. The objective of this study was to examine the association between dental X-rays, the most common artificial source of ionizing radiation, and the risk of intracranial meningioma, the most common type of brain tumor in the United States. They found that those who report ever having a bite wing X-ray had about twice the odds of a brain tumor, and those that got a panoramic series, the full mouth X-rays, before age 10 had nearly 5 times the odds. So does that mean dental X-rays cause brain tumors? Well, the jury is still out. Just because dental X-rays are associated with brain tumors, argued a group of dental radiologists, doesn't necessarily mean the X-rays cause the brain tumors. Maybe brain tumors cause the X-rays. Seriously, they criticized the paper for not entertaining alternative explanations, such as the facial pain that can be caused by brain tumors triggering the need for dental radiographs, meaning you go to your dentist because your face hurts, and your dentist orders some X-rays. Little do either of you know it could have been a brain tumor all along. Or maybe there's a third variable, such as head trauma, resulting in both additional X-rays and brain tumors. Getting hit in the head as a kid actually increases your risk of developing a brain tumor, and getting hit in the head is also a good way to end up in a dentist chair getting X-rays for broken teeth. While more research is being done, The bottom line is, as with all sources of artificial ionizing radiation, considered use of this modifiable risk factor may be of benefit to patients. This means that the dentist should consider carefully the justification for every exposure. This means dentists should not prescribe routine dental x-rays at preset intervals for all patients, like every 6 months or every year, whatever. Says who? Says the official recommendation of the American Dental Association. Dentists should not prescribe routine dental x-rays at preset intervals. There's little evidence to support irradiating people looking at all the teeth in search of hidden problems in asymptomatic patients. Accordingly, doctors should select patients wisely, only take x-rays when there is a patient-specific reason to believe there's a reasonable expectation the x-rays will offer unique information influencing diagnosis or treatment. Doctors appear to be causing tens of thousands of cancers with CT scans. Dentists may be causing a few brain tumors with dental x-rays. What about the newfangled airport full-body scanners that use so-called backscatter technology to reduce x-ray exposure? 1,000 times less radiation exposure than a chest x-ray, though they're still being phased out. In fact, you may get 100 times more radiation just during the flight every hour, just because you're so high up in the atmosphere and exposed to more cosmic rays. Wait a second, does that mean a round-trip cross-country flight is almost like getting a chest x-ray? Yes. Anyone who's been on my website and seen my speaking schedule knows I'm totally screwed. But what can you do? As is the answer to so many health questions, you can eat healthy. High dietary antioxidant intakes are associated with decreased DNA damage in airline pilots. Note the word dietary. Antioxidant supplements did not work. No benefit was found for those taking multivitamins, vitamin C pills, and vitamin E pills. But those getting the most vitamin C from food saw a significant decrease in DNA damage. Beta-carotene from food, cryptoxanthin from food, lutein zeaxanthin from food. These are all phytonutrients, of course, so when they say food, they really mean plants, and because antioxidants can have synergistic effects, the greatest protection was found when they were eating a combination of phytonutrients. So the greatest protection was found in those eating the citrus and broccoli, and nuts and seeds, and pumpkins, and peppers, and dark green leafy vegetables. Though if one had to pick, greens may work the best. And all this time, I'd been packing kale chips on planes as a snack just because they're so lightweight, but now I know their dual purpose. These findings suggest that a diet consisting of a variety of fruit and vegetables that provide a natural source of these antioxidants, as well as other potential protective factors, may offer the best protection against cumulative DNA damage associated with ionizing radiation exposure. Our results may be applicable to flight crews, astronauts, and spaceflight, and frequent flyers in the general population. Same thing was actually found after Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bomb survivors were followed for decades. Models based on the available data suggest that the cancer risk reduction by vegetables in exposed persons may have went from about 50% increased risk of cancer knocked down by daily green and vegetable consumption down to only about 30% increased risk, and similarly with fruit consumption. So fruit and vegetable consumption can decrease but not eliminate the risks of radiation. Same thing with kids after Chernobyl. Consumers of fresh vegetables and fruits afforded protection to the immune systems of young children, whereas egg and fish consumption was associated with significantly increased risk of chromosome damage in their bloodstreams. This was explained by saying, look, maybe the eggs and fish were radioactive, or maybe it was just damage from the animal fat intake alone. The German Medical Association finally just apologized for the profession's role in the Nazi atrocities, 65 years after 20 physicians stood trial in Nuremberg. During the trial, the Nazi doctors argued that their experiments were not unlike previous studies by researchers in the United States. like Dr. Strong's injection of prisoners with the plague. Nazi doctors were hung. Dr. Strong went on to chair a department at Harvard. And we were just getting started. The few examples the Nazis cited were nothing compared to what the American medical establishment started doing after Nuremberg. After all, prisoners are much cheaper than chimpanzees. Much attention has focused on our Cold War radiation experiments, which remained classified for decades. Declassification, the American Energy Commission warned, would have a very poor effect on the public, because they described experiments performed on human subjects, including the actual injection of plutonium into the body. Subjects like Mr. Cade, a 53-year-old colored male who got into a car accident and ended up in the hospital. Great, let's inject him with plutonium! Who else is powerless besides patients? How about kids? At the Fernald School for the Mentally Retarded in Waltham, Massachusetts, who were fed radioactive isotopes in their breakfast cereal. Tricks are for kids. Despite the Pentagon's insistence that these were the only feasible means of developing ways to protect people from radiation, researchers have since come up with a few ways that don't violate the Nuremberg Code, which states the only time doctors are allowed to do experiments that may kill or disable people if they themselves are willing to sign up to be experimental subjects as well. One way is to study cells in a petri dish. The protective effect of zingerone against radiation-induced genetic damage and cell death in human white blood cells. What is zingerone? It's a phytonutrient found in cooked ginger root. You blast cells with some gamma rays, and you get less DNA damage and fewer free radicals when you add ginger phytonutrients. They even compared it to the leading drug injected into people for radiation sickness, and found the ginger compound to be 150 times more powerful, and without the serious side effects of the drug itself. They conclude that it's an inexpensive natural product that may protect against radiation-induced damage. In fact, lots of different plant products have been found to be protective in vitro against radiation damage, by a whole variety of mechanisms. After all, plants have been utilized since time immemorial for curing diseases, so they started screening plants and also found radiation protective benefits from other plants one can find at grocery stores. Garlic, turmeric, goji berries, mint leaves. But this is all just on plants and cells in a test tube. Right? None had actually been tested on actual people until now. How are you going to find people exposed to radiation you can test stuff on? Well, aside from pilots, another group that suffers inordinate radiation exposure is the hospital workers that run the X-ray machines, who have been found to suffer chromosomal damage as a result compared to other hospital staff, and higher levels of oxidative stress within their bodies. Although X-rays can damage DNA directly, much of the damage is caused by the free radicals generated by the radiation. So they asked radiation staff to drink 2 cups a day of lemon balm tea for a month, an herbal tea known to have high levels of antioxidants, as I showed in one of my favorite videos, Antioxidants in a Pinch. So what happened? The level of antioxidant enzymes in their bloodstream went up, and the level of free radical damage went down, leading to the conclusion that oral administration of lemon balm tea may be helpful for the protection of the radiology staff against radiation-induced oxidative stress, an improved antioxidant defense system, especially enzymatic defense, due to its antioxidant properties. And if that's the reason, then practically any plant should fit the bill. So know that as you're sucking on some crystallized ginger to prevent travel sickness on some airplane, Little did you know that you may be protecting yourself from the cosmic radiation at that altitude as well. Trans fats are bad, increasing one's risk of heart disease, sudden death, and diabetes. Even perhaps aggression. Trans fat intake has been associated with overt aggressive behavior, impatience, and irritability. Trans fats are basically only found one place in nature: animal fat. The food industry, however, found a way to synthetically create these toxic fats by hardening vegetable oil in a process called hydrogenation, which rearranges their atoms to make them behave more like animal fats. Although most of America's trans fat intake has traditionally come from processed foods containing partially hydrogenated oils, a fifth of the trans fats in the American diet used to come from animal products, 1.2 grams out of the 5.8 total consumed daily on average. But now that trans fat labeling has been mandated, and places like New York City banned the use of partially hydrogenated oils, the intake of industrially produced trans fat is down to about 1.3. So that means about 50% of Americans' trans fat intake now comes from animal products. According to the official USDA nutrient database, cheese, milk, yogurt, burgers, chicken fat, turkey meat, bologna, hot dogs contain up to about between 1 to 5% trans fats. They also found small amounts of trans fats in non-hydrogenated vegetable oils due to steam deodorization or stripping during the refining process. Now, is getting a few percent trans fats a problem, though? The most prestigious scientific body in the United States, the National Academies of Science, concluded that the only safe intake of trans fats is 0. In their report condemning trans fats, they couldn't even assign a tolerable upper daily limit of intake, because any incremental increase in trans fatty acid intake increases coronary heart disease risk. There's been controversy, though, as to whether the trans fats naturally found in animal products are as bad as the synthetic fats in partially hydrogenated junk food. The latest study supports the notion that trans fat intake, irrespective of source, animal or industrial, increases cardiovascular disease risk, especially, it appears, in women. Because trans fats are unavoidable on ordinary, non-vegan diets, getting down to 0% trans fats would require significant changes in patterns of dietary intake. One of the authors of the report, the director of Harvard's cardiovascular epidemiology program, famously explained why, despite this, they did not recommend a vegan diet. "We can't tell people to stop eating all meat and all dairy products," he said. "Well, we could tell people to become vegetarians," he added. "If we were truly basing this only on science, we would, but it is a bit extreme." Wouldn't want scientists basing anything on science, now would we? Nevertheless, the report concludes it is recommended that trans fatty acid consumption be as low as possible while consuming a nutritionally adequate diet. Even eating vegan, though, there's a loophole in labeling regulations that allows food with trans fats that contain up to 0.5 grams per serving to be listed as having, you guessed it, 0 grams of trans fat. This labeling is misguiding the public by allowing foods to be labeled as trans fat-free when they are in fact not. So, to avoid all trans fats, avoid meat and dairy, refined oils, and anything that says partially hydrogenated in the ingredients list, regardless of what it says on the nutrition facts label. Infertility affects 10 to 15% of couples attempting to conceive. In about half the cases, a problem is found in the man. A recent Harvard study found that increasing saturated fat intake just 5% was associated with a 38% lower sperm count. But why? I've talked about the role of xenoestrogens, endocrine-disrupting industrial pollutants that build up in animal fat, particularly fish. But male fertility is not just about sperm count, the number of sperm, but about how well the sperms themselves work. A recent study found that successful pregnancy and fertilized egg implantation outcomes are decreased in patients reporting a more frequent intake of meat. This finding is consistent with poor semen quality associated with a higher intake of products that may incorporate these chemicals and steroids. The use of these compounds in the food industry results in an increased total level of xenoestrogens and sex steroids in processed foods, such as meat or milk, whose intake contributes significantly to daily exposures. Xenoestrogens are highly lipophilic substances that can accumulate in fat-rich foods, such as meat, and may be suspected as partially responsible for the decline in semen quality. Conclusion: couples having trouble conceiving must be advised about the drastic effect of both the male and female lifestyles on infertility treatment success. This is consistent with previous findings that frequent intake of fat-laden foods like meat products and milk may negatively affect semen quality in humans, whereas some fruits or vegetables may maintain or improve semen quality. Vegetable consumption was also found protective in the new study, which may be because of the antioxidant and nutrient content of these plant foods. The adverse effects of meat could be from other pollutants as well. Exposure, even as an infant, to low levels of dioxin can permanently reduce sperm quality. The general consensus is that human sperm quality has declined over time in different areas. We're still not sure why, but dioxins may be playing a causal role. The reason why maternal beef consumption may alter a man's testicular development and adversely affect his future reproductive capacity is thought to be due to the anabolic steroids implanted into the animals. But as the accompanying editorial points out, the steroids could also be interacting with other xenobiotic, meaning industrial chemicals, present in meat, such as pesticides and dioxin-like pollutants, and even chemicals that may be present in the plastic wrap. Heavy metals may also play a role. Lead and cadmium exposure, as measured in the bloodstream, was associated with a significantly longer time to conceive. Where might exposure be coming from? Well, common types of seafood, right out of fish markets and supermarkets, were sampled. The highest cadmium levels were found in tuna, highest lead levels found in scallops and shrimp. The greatest risk from different metals resided in different fish, some of which got really high. Thus, the risk information given to the public, and mainly about mercury, does not present a complete picture. There are other toxic metals in fish as well. The largest and oldest fish had some of the highest levels, and we see that with other animals as well. For example, contamination of beef by cadmium and lead, clearly dependent on the age of the animal. The only beverage associated with infertility in women was soft drinks, though this may be from an indirect route, with soda linked to obesity, and then obesity then linked to reduced fertilization rates. Though there has been a study on one really direct route, the effectiveness of Coca-Cola as a spermicidal agent in vaginal douching. Diet Coke apparently had the strongest effect. Harvard researchers publishing in the New England Journal of Medicine. What about Coke versus Pepsi? Taxpayer money hard at work for this head-to-head test, and neither of them really worked, Coke nor Pepsi. Though they explained their methods for preparing the sperm-cola mixtures differed from the Harvard group, bottom line, soda probably isn't good for you going into any orifice. For decades, on the basis of concerns from the American Heart Association and consumer groups, the Federal Trade Commission carried out successful legal action, upheld by the Supreme Court, to compel the egg industry to cease and desist from false and misleading advertising that eggs had no harmful effects on health. See, anti-cholesterol attacks on eggs resulted in severe economic loss through a reduction in egg consumption, so the egg industry created a National Commission on Egg Nutrition to combat the anti-cholesterol, anti-egg publicity with ads like this. exclaiming there is no scientific evidence whatsoever that eating eggs in any way increases the risk of heart attack, which the U.S. Court of Appeals found patently false and misleading. Even the tobacco industry wasn't that brazen, instead just trying to introduce the element of doubt, arguing that the relationship between smoking and health remained an open question. The egg ads made 7 claims, each of which, in truth and in fact, was determined to be bull. The court determined the egg industry ads were, and are, false, misleading, deceptive. In fact, legal scholars view what the tobacco industry tried to do as the same as what the American Egg Board's Nutrition Commission on Egg Nutrition tried to do. As with the egg ads, the tobacco industry did more than just espouse one side of a genuine controversy, but just denied the existence of scientific evidence. Over the last 36 years, the American Egg Board has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to convince people eggs are not going to kill them, and it's working. In combination with aggressive nutritional science and public relations efforts, research shows that the advertising has been effective in decreasing consumers' concerns over eggs and cholesterol heart health. This is from their internal strategy documents I got a hold of. Currently, they're targeting moms. Their approach is to surround moms wherever they are. They pay integration fees for egg product placement in TV shows. To integrate eggs into The Biggest Loser, for example, could be $1 million. But getting some kids' storytime reading program to integrate eggs may only take $500,000, though. The American Egg Board keeps track of who is and is not a friend of eggs. They pay scientists $1,500 to sit and answer questions like, what studies can help disassociate eggs from cardiovascular disease? From the beginning, their arch-nemesis was the American Heart Association, over which they fought a major battle over cholesterol. In documents retrieved through the Freedom of Information Act, we see even the USDA repeatedly chastising the egg industry for misrepresenting the American Heart Association position. In a draft letter to magazine editors, the egg industry tried to say that the American Heart Association changed its recommendations to approve an egg a day in 2000, and eventually eliminated its number of restrictions on eggs in 2002, to which the head of USDA's Poultry Research and Promotion Programs had to explain the quote-unquote change in 2000 wasn't a change at all. Nothing in the guidelines or recommendations was changed. What happened is that in response to a question posed by someone planted in the audience, Heart Association reps acknowledged that even though eggs are the most concentrated source of cholesterol in the diet, since an individual egg has less than 300 milligrams of cholesterol, technically an egg could fit under the 300 milligram daily limit. And in 2002, they just eliminated the specific mention of eggs for consistency's sake. But the American Heart Association insists that they haven't changed their position and continue to warn consumers about eggs. Here's from the AHA website at the time. If one egg has 213, and the limit of dietary cholesterol intake for people with normal cholesterol is 300, you could fit in an egg if you cut down on all other animal products. Right? You can have an egg for breakfast, and then if you had some coffee, some skinless turkey breast, etc., you could end up 510, right? Nearly twice the recommended limit. So if you're going to eat an egg, you need to substitute vegetables for some of the meat, you drink your coffee black, and watch for hidden eggs in baked goods. And the limit for folks with high cholesterol is 200 milligrams a day, which may not even allow a single egg a day. This is how the Senior Director of Nutrition Education at the American Egg Board's Egg Nutrition Center characterized the American Heart Association guidelines. Maybe I'm being overly sensitive, but this reads like, if you insist on having those deadly high cholesterol eggs, your penalty will be to eat vegetables. And you can't even have that yummy steak and creamy coffee you love. Really, it's not worth eating eggs. Oh, and if you think you'll be able to enjoy some delicious baked goods, forget it. The deadly eggs are there too. We've known for decades that beans have an exceptionally low glycemic index. You give someone cooked beans, peas, or lentils, and you don't even get half the blood sugar spike you get with the same amount of carbs in the form of bread, pasta, or potatoes. So if you're going to eat some high glycemic food like white rice, consider having some beans with it, and the more beans, the better. Check it out. As your bean-to-rice ratio increases from left to right, from more rice with some beans to more like beans with some rice, you can see these trends towards improving cardiometabolic risk factors. Substituting 1 serving of beans for 1 serving of white rice was associated with a 35% lower risk of metabolic syndrome, or prediabetes. Why do beans have such a low glycemic index? Maybe it's because they got so much fiber, the absorption is just slower or something, but it was this next study that blew people's minds. Started out same as before, give someone some bread for breakfast and get a big spike in blood sugar and insulin levels, but give the same amount of carbs in lentil form, and you blunt the effect. OK, but now let's follow through to lunch. At breakfast, same as before, big spike with the bread, small spike with lentils. But then for lunch, both groups got the same meal. Both got bread. And those that had lentils 4 hours earlier with breakfast had less of a glycemic reaction to the bread. At the time, they called it the lentil effect. But chickpeas appear to work just as well, so it has since been dubbed the second meal effect. Eat lentils for dinner, and then for breakfast, even if forced to drink sugar water, you have better glycemic control. Beans moderating your blood sugar not just at the meal you eat them, but hours later, even the next day. How is that even possible? The mystery has since been solved. Remember what our gazillions of gut bacteria do with fiber? They produce compounds like propionate with it, which gets absorbed into our system and slows down gastric emptying, slows the rate at which food leaves our stomach, so we don't get as much of a sugar rush. It's like symbiosis. We feed our good bacteria, they feed us back. So, you have a bean burrito for supper, and by the next morning it's time for your gut bacteria to eat that same burrito, and the byproducts they create with it may affect how our breakfast the next morning is digested. They figured this out by giving people rectal infusions of the amount of propionate your good bacteria might make from a good burrito, and you can see the stomach relax within minutes of the rectal infusion. So I guess if you forgot to eat any kind of beans, peas, or lentils for supper, and need to blunt the effects of your breakfast donut, it's theoretically not too late, but in general I encourage people to administer their food orally. Cervical cancer is now considered a sexually transmitted disease. Originally suspected as such, as it was supposedly found less in nuns and more in prostitutes, but now we have DNA fingerprinting proof that virtually all cervical cancer is caused by a sexually transmitted virus, human papillomavirus, which also causes cancer of the penis, vagina, vulva, and throat. HPV is considered a necessary, but not sufficient, cause of cancer. Most young women contract HPV, but most don't get cervical cancer because their immune systems are able to clear out the virus. 70% of women clear the infection within 1 year, and more than 90% within 2 years, before the virus can cause cancer, unless you're immunocompromised or something. Well, if that's the case, maybe those with particularly strong immune systems might clear the virus even faster. That's what may be behind this new study that found that vegetarian women appear to have significantly lower infection rates with HPV. One of many studies reporting vegetarians having lower risk of HPV infection, thought to be because of the presence of more fruits and vegetables in their diet, which are rich sources of all sorts of good phytonutrients. So for example, if you take a bunch of women with cancer-causing strains of HPV infecting their cervix, and follow them out and retest at 3 months and then 9 months, while analyzing their diets, what do you find? Higher levels of vegetable consumption may cut the risk of HPV persistence in half, double one's likelihood of clearing this potentially cancer-causing infection, and higher levels just meant like 2 or more servings a day. What do antioxidants in plants have to do with viral diseases? Well, different antioxidants affect different viruses in different ways, but against HPV, don't you know that electrophoretic mobility supershift assays showed irrespective of enhanced C phosphorus expression, C. junus phosphorylated became primarily heterodimerized with FRA1, which was also induced after PDTC incubation. I mean, duh. I had to read this paper like 5 times. Long story short, antioxidants appear to suppress the activation of critical segments of the virus's DNA. Maybe that's why smearing green tea on genital warts, also caused by HPV, has been found so effective in clearing them. In terms of preventing cervical cancer, through their role as antioxidants, phytonutrients like lutein, found in dark green leafy vegetables, and lycopene, the red pigment in tomatoes, may decrease viral load, thereby decreasing persistence and progression to disease. Whereas the protective associations may be due to their antioxidant properties, they have all sorts of other wonderful effects, so who knows, who cares? Bottom line, higher consumption of vegetables may decrease risk of HPV persistence, which may help explain why this 2013 study found vegan women have significantly lower rates of all female cancers combined, including cancer of the cervix. After diagnosis, women with breast cancer may cut their risk of dying nearly in half, estrogen receptor positive, estrogen receptor negative, just by instituting simple, modest lifestyle changes. 5 or more servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and just like walking 30 minutes a day, 6 days a week. But what about preventing breast cancer in the first place? If you actually follow the advice, the official dietary guidelines for cancer prevention, does it actually reduce your risk of cancer? If you manage your weight, eat more plant foods, less animal foods, less alcohol, and breastfeed if you're a woman, based on the largest prospective study on diet and cancer in history, you may significantly lower your risk of breast cancer, endometrial cancer, colorectal cancer, lung cancer, kidney cancer, stomach cancer, UADT cancer. You do not want to get cancer in your UADT, believe me. No, that's basically means oral cancer. As well as lower risk for liver cancer, esophageal cancer, and all cancers combined. Of all the recommendations, the eat mostly foods of plant origin appeared the most powerful. For example, a study in the UK found that in just 1 year in Britain, there were 14,902 excess cases of cancer caused by something they were exposed to 10 years earlier. What was that something that ended up causing thousands of cancers? Deficient intake of fruits and vegetables. If that was instead some chemical spill or something causing 14,000 cancers, people would be up in arms to ban it. But instead, when that killer carcinogen is not eating your fruit and veg, as the Brits would say, hardly gets anyone's attention. What if you throw in smoking too? Researchers created a healthy lifestyle index defined by 4 things. Number 1, exercise. Number 2, a dietary shift away from the standard American diet high in meat, dairy, fat, and sugar towards a more prudent dietary pattern, for instance, green and yellow vegetables, beans, fruits. Number 3, avoidance of tobacco. Number 4, avoidance of alcohol. Young women scoring higher on those 4 things may cut their odds of getting breast cancer in half, and older women may cut their odds of breast cancer 80%. We've covered how even light drinking can increase breast cancer risk, but for women who refuse to eliminate alcohol, which is less carcinogenic, red wine or white? Well, some studies, such as the Harvard Women's Health Study, suggest less or even no risk from red wine, and we may have just figured out why. Remember how mushrooms were the vegetable best able to suppress the activity of aromatase, the enzyme used by breast tumors to produce their own estrogen? Well, if you run the same human placenta experiments with fruit, strawberries get the silver, but grapes get the gold. What kind of grapes? Well, those wimpy green grapes used to make white wine didn't work compared to those used for making red. Bottom line, red wine may serve as a nutritional aromatase inhibitor, which may ameliorate the elevated breast cancer risk associated with the alcohol intake in the red wine. But why accept any elevated risk by instead just eating the grapes? And if you do, choose ones with seeds if you can, as they may work even better. probably about a third of common cancers can be prevented by eating a healthy, plant-based diet, being physically active, and maintaining a healthy weight. One of the ways plants may help is by cutting off the supply lines to cancerous tumors. A tumor cannot grow without a blood supply. Currently, it's believed that a tumor mass cannot exist in a volume greater than about the size of the ball at the tip of a ballpoint pen without a proper blood supply, which indicates that angiogenesis — angio means vessel, so the genesis, the creation of new blood vessels, is critical to tumor growth. Each one of us has cancer cells in us right now. By age 70, microscopic cancers are detected in the thyroid glands of virtually everyone, for example. Most of these tumors never cause problems, never become clinically significant, leading to the concept of cancer without disease as a normal state during aging. Cancer cells are commonly present in the body, but they can't grow into tumors any bigger than that tiny dot size, no more than 10 million cancer cells, before needing to get hooked up to a blood supply. So, tumors diabolically release angiogenic factors, chemicals, that cause new blood vessels to sprout into the tumor. The most important one is called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. But we can suppress VEGF with veggies. Many of the phytonutrients we know and love in tea and spices and fruit and berries and broccoli and beans can block cancer's stimulation of new blood vessels. They're ideal for prophylactic long-term use against breast cancer because of their reliability, availability, safety, and affordable price. Dietary agents used to suppress angiogenesis may be an important step in the prevention and treatment of breast cancer, and in fact, all types of tumors. The review concludes that we now have convincing evidence that dietary plant constituents possess the unique ability to affect tumor angiogenesis, which may be deemed advantageous in the prevention and treatment of human breast cancer. Most of these studies have only been done in a petri dish, though. You stimulate human blood vessel cells, and they start forming these tubular structures, trying to make new capillaries to feed the tumor. But if you add plant flavones like apigenin or luteolin, found throughout the plant kingdom, like in citrus, celery, and peppers, you can see they help block the tube formation. Here's the effect of fisetin, a phytonutrient found in strawberries and other fruits and veggies. It just shrinks the beginnings of new blood vessel formation right on down. Where do researchers get their hands on human blood vessels? From human umbilical vein endothelial cells. They get them from discarded umbilical cords, or more controversially, from the eyes of aborted fetuses. But either way, you can stimulate blood vessel formation with the tumor compound VEGF, and then abolish that effect with plant compounds, in this case from purple rice. Therefore, the daily consumption of natural foods containing adequate flavonoids could be beneficial for the prevention of cancer metastasis, or could improve cancer prognosis. Given the power of plants, one might speculate that the foundation of an anti-angiogenic approach to cancer might be a whole food vegan diet.